I never thought I'd be that woman. The kind who crosses lines that can never be uncrossed. But sometimes, life doesn't play fair. It presents you with twisted paths disguised as comfort, and before you know it, you've lost your way. It started 3 years ago when I was going through a devastating breakup. My best friend, Alyssa, had been married for 5 years at that point. Her husband, Daniel, was always kind, respectful, the type of man you trusted to watch your drink, to walk you to your car, to give you advice without expectation. I was staying at their house for a few weeks, just to regroup. Alyssa worked long hours, and Daniel was often the one at home. We talked. A lot. About everything. At first, it felt like talking to a brother, someone who saw my broken pieces and didn't flinch. He'd leave notes on my tea mug, "You're stronger than you think." He made me laugh when I thought I'd never smile again. But slowly, things changed. His compliments became more personal. "He was a fool to let you go," he said once, eyes lingering longer than they should have. I brushed it off. Until one night wine, laughter, silence. A moment of quiet understanding turned into a stolen kiss in the kitchen. I panicked. So did he. We promised to forget it. Pretend it didn't happen. But it kept happening. Not always physically, sometimes just conversations that felt too intimate, too full of longing. We never slept together, but it felt like cheating. Emotional cheating. And that guilt. It was unbearable. I started avoiding Alyssa. Every time she'd talk about how lucky she was to have Daniel, I felt like I was dying inside. He'd text me things like, "I think about you too much and I wish things were different." I knew it had to stop. So I distanced myself. I tried to cut him off. Then came the night he showed up at my door drunk, heartbroken, saying he was leaving her. That he wanted to be with me. That he'd been in love with me for months. I was speechless. Horrified. I told him to go home. But the damage was done. Somehow, Alyssa found out. Whether it was a text she saw, or something in his behavior, I'll never know. She never spoke to me again. Daniel moved out. Their marriage ended. I didn't end up with him. I didn't want to. The emotional wreckage was enough to bury me. It's been over a year. I still replay it, all the signs, the choices, the betrayal. And the truth is, sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come from the ones who touch you, but from those who make you feel seen when you're at your weakest. I lost my best friend, her trust, and a part of myself I'll never get back. It all began with what felt like harmless emotional support, something anyone would expect from a friend's husband during a difficult time. I was emotionally drained, having just ended a long-term relationship that left me questioning my worth and struggling to hold myself together. In that raw, vulnerable place, I moved in with Alyssa, my best friend since college, and her husband, Daniel. The plan was simple: stay a few weeks, find my footing, and get back on my feet. What I didn't expect was that the person who would be there the most during those nights of doubt and breakdowns wasn't Alyssa, it was Daniel. Alyssa had just landed a demanding promotion and was often gone from early morning until late at night. Meanwhile, Daniel worked remotely, which meant he was usually home during the day. At first, it felt like a blessing. Someone was around to talk to share a meal with, to fill in the silence that often became unbearable. Our conversations began casually: TV shows, recipes, bits of personal history. But then he started asking about my breakup, about how I was feeling, really feeling. It was rare to find someone who asked without judgment or advice, just listened. And I was starved for that kind of attention. Little by little, the conversations grew deeper. He remembered small things: my favorite tea, the songs I liked to listen to when I couldn't sleep, the way my ex used to criticize my laugh. He'd leave a cup of tea outside my bedroom door some mornings, scribbling notes on sticky pads: "You're braver than you think," or "Today is yours. Take it." At the time, it felt comforting. I told myself he was just being nice, maybe even filling the gaps Alyssa couldn't at the time. But beneath the comfort, something else was forming. An emotional tether, thin but growing stronger with every shared glance, every quiet moment when he sat beside me a little too long. He never made any overt moves, not then. It was in the subtext. The way he'd ask how I was doing and then wait, really wait, for the answer. How he'd lower his voice in the evenings when it was just the two of us. How he'd lean in, his hand brushing mine just long enough to make me question whether it was intentional. These weren't just acts of kindness anymore. They were invitations, soft, unspoken suggestions that we were in some emotional space separate from the rest of the house. And I let it happen. That's the part one wrestle with the most. I could have pulled away, drawn a line, gone out of my way to re-establish the boundary between us. But I didn't. I craved being seen. I craved the warmth of someone thinking I mattered. After months of feeling discarded and unloved, Daniel made me feel visible again. Not just as someone's best friend or someone's ex, but as a woman. He saw my pain, but he also saw me beyond it, and in that, I found something dangerous. We weren't just two people under one roof anymore. We were emotionally attached in a way that neither of us admitted out loud, but both of us felt deeply. The boundary between what was appropriate and what wasn't had already been crossed, not physically, but emotionally. And somehow, that felt even more intimate. Even more irreversible. What started as simple moments of comfort slowly turned into a web of confusion filled with unspoken tension and blurred intentions. At first, Daniel's support felt like a balm, gentle, appropriate, and exactly what I needed in a time when my world was falling apart. But as days turned into weeks, I began to notice the subtle shift in how he interacted with me. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was in the details: the extra second his eyes lingered when I laughed, the way he'd touch the small of my back as I passed him in the kitchen, or how his voice softened when we were alone, like we were speaking in some private language no one else was meant to hear. These weren't grand gestures or explicit signs of romantic interest. That's what made it so confusing. Each interaction was small enough to dismiss individually, but collectively, they started to form a pattern, one that I didn't fully understand until I was already wrapped up in it. He'd say things like, "You deserve someone who really gets you," or "You're not as broken as you think," his tone laced with something deeper than casual kindness. I'd laugh it off, but those words stuck with me longer than they should have. They felt targeted, loaded, as if he was seeing something in me no one else had bothered to see. Late at night, we'd end up in the living room, just the two of us. The conversations started as harmless check-ins: "You okay today?" or "Want to watch something?" But they always lasted longer than they should have. He'd ask about my dreams, my fears, the parts of my breakup I hadn't even admitted to Alyssa. And in those quiet hours, he became more than just a friend's husband. He became the person I looked forward to talking to, the person who made me feel alive again after months of emotional numbness. But those moments, though comforting, started to feel dangerous. Like we were playing a game we hadn't agreed to play. What made it more complicated was the lack of clarity. Neither of us spoke about the shift, yet it hung in the air every time we were together. There were looks that held too much weight, silences that stretched just a second too long. When our fingers brushed, it wasn't accidental. When our knees touched on the couch, no one moved away. It was the kind of tension that sits in your chest, making it hard to breathe, but even harder to walk away from. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I was imagining it or if he was feeling it too. That uncertainty kept me suspended in emotional limbo, torn between guilt and longing. The mixed signals became the foundation of our emotional entanglement. Some days he'd pull back, act completely normal, like the devoted husband and respectful friend. Other days, he'd send texts late at night, harmless on the surface, but too personal to ignore. "Thinking of that conversation we had last night," or "You always know how to make me laugh." I told myself I was reading too much into things, that I was vulnerable and projecting emotions onto someone who was just being kind. But deep down, I knew better. There was a charge between us, something neither of us dared acknowledge aloud, yet neither of us tried hard enough to extinguish. The emotional closeness we developed became a dangerous kind of intimacy, one that didn't involve sex, but felt more invasive than any physical touch. I found myself thinking about him when he wasn't around, replaying our conversations, reading between every line. I began dressing a little nicer around the house, wondering if he noticed. And I hated myself for it. Yet I kept doing it. We were both locked in a dance of restraint and silent temptation, and with every unspoken thought and stolen glance, the line between innocent and inappropriate continued to dissolve. The guilt crept in like a slow-moving storm, quiet at first, almost invisible, but gradually growing heavier with every glance, every moment of silence I shared with Daniel that I couldn't explain. It started as something I thought I could manage, something I could carry without consequence. But over time, it began to erode me from the inside out. Every time I laughed with him while Alyssa was in the next room, I felt like I was stealing something that didn't belong to me. I wasn't doing anything technically wrong, or so I told myself. We hadn't kissed again since that night in the kitchen. There were no long embraces, no confessions. But what we were doing, this emotional back and forth, this growing attachment we refused to name, was just as real and just as damaging. Maybe more so. I found myself hiding small things, deleting text messages that felt too friendly, too personal. Avoiding mentioning conversations we had when Alyssa asked what I did that day. I felt like I was leading a double life under the roof of someone who loved and trusted me with everything. And that's what made it so unbearable. Alyssa was the kind of friend who showed up at 2 a.m. when I couldn't stop crying, who sat outside job interviews with me just so I wouldn't feel alone. She had taken me into her home during one of the darkest periods of my life without hesitation. And there I was, harboring feelings for her husband and pretending like everything was fine. The secret I was carrying began to change the way I interacted with her. I became guarded, emotionally distant, and overly polite. I started to monitor my tone, my words, everything I said, afraid something would slip and she'd see the truth written across my face. She'd often ask me if I was okay, tell me I seemed off, but I'd brush her off with a tired smile and a lie about needing more sleep. The truth was, I was barely holding it together. I was living inside a lie of my own making, terrified of being found out but equally terrified of facing what I had become. Meanwhile, Daniel and I carried on like nothing had changed, even though everything had. We shared glances that spoke volumes and moments of silence that rang louder than words. The emotional energy between us became its own unspoken language, coded, private, and utterly consuming. But neither of us had the courage to confront it, and so we let it simmer in the shadows. We thought we were being careful. We thought we could manage it. But secrets have a way of growing louder in silence, and the more we tried to suppress it, the more it controlled us. I hated the version of myself that was emerging in that house. I became anxious, distracted, and irritable. I'd overcompensate in front of Alyssa, offering to cook, to clean, to help in ways that felt more like penance than generosity. It didn't matter how many good deeds I stacked up, they couldn't cancel out the betrayal I was hiding behind my eyes. And yet, even with the guilt weighing on me like lead, I couldn't bring myself to leave. A part of me was still hoping that maybe Daniel would pull away, that he'd say this wasn't right, that he'd make the decision I couldn't. But he didn't. And neither did I. We stayed suspended in this toxic limbo, pretending that our connection was harmless, all while knowing it was anything but. The guilt eventually became a part of my daily existence, a dull, persistent ache I carried in my chest, behind every smile and casual conversation. I stopped recognizing myself in the mirror. I wasn't just hiding a secret anymore, I was becoming it. It was a quiet Tuesday night when everything unraveled. Nothing about the day hinted at the explosion that was coming. Alyssa was working late, as usual, and I was in my room trying to pretend like I wasn't aware of Daniel's presence in the house. We had been drifting in this unbearable state of emotional tension for weeks, no longer innocent, but not fully broken either. We hadn't talked much since I started pulling back, trying to create space between us, but the silence had only made things more tense. That night, though, something was different. I heard a soft knock on my door, and when I opened it, Daniel stood there, his face flushed, eyes glossy, reeking faintly of whiskey and something heavier, desperation. He didn't ask to come in. He just did. He sat on the edge of my bed like it was the most natural thing in the world and stared at the floor for what felt like hours. Then, quietly, he said he couldn't do it anymore. That being around me every day was torture, that pretending nothing was happening between us had become impossible. I remember freezing in place, my breath caught in my throat. He confessed it all, not just to me, but to himself. He told me he was in love with me. That he hadn't felt this connected to anyone in years. That he was planning to leave Alyssa. I couldn't speak. My mind was racing, trying to catch up with the words he had just said. Part of me had wondered if he felt the same, but to hear it out loud, to hear him say he was willing to destroy everything to be with me, shattered every illusion I had been clinging to. I told him to leave. I told him we had crossed a line we could never uncross, and this wasn't love, it was escape. A fantasy born out of proximity and emotional wounds. But it didn't matter what I said. The damage was already done. I don't know if he told her himself or if she found out another way, but the next day, everything fell apart. Alyssa didn't confront me with shouting or tears. She just walked into the room, calm and unreadable, and said, "I know. That's it." 2 words that felt like a guillotine. I tried to explain, to make her understand that nothing physical had happened beyond that one kiss, that I never intended for any of this to spiral so far. But she looked at me with a kind of heartbreak I'd never seen before, not just betrayal, but disbelief. Like she couldn't recognize the person standing in front of her. And honestly, neither could I. Daniel moved out within days. Alyssa cut me off completely. No calls. No texts. Not even a chance to say goodbye properly. Years of friendship, erased in the span of a week. I thought maybe after some time, she'd want to talk, even if it was to scream at me, but that moment never came. I heard through a mutual friend that she started therapy, that she was doing okay, that she had completely removed both me and Daniel from her life. I don't blame her. As for Daniel and I, nothing happened. No fairy tale ending. No romantic redemption. After the fallout, he tried to reach out, but I ignored him. I realized in that moment that we were never meant to be anything more than a cautionary tale. What we had wasn't love, it was something built on wounds, secrecy, and stolen emotions. And once the truth came out, it didn't liberate us. It destroyed everything.
Kickstart your content creation with Jenny and unleash your creativity.